hello, this is Praveen. Welcome to dotnetgurukul.com for the SQL Server training. Today we are in Module 1, Introduction to Databases, okay, Session 5. Session 5 will discuss on the database normalization. So I divided this particular session into two different parts, okay. So here are the part 1 agenda items. So I'm going to introduce with respect to the normalization, and we'll go through the first normalization, second normalization, and third normalization. Okay, later in the second part, I will let you know on the BCNF and the fourth normalization. Okay, so let's get started. Understanding unnormalized data. So what is actually unnormalized data? So unnormalized data is nothing but the data is not properly structured. Okay, so all the data is put in one particular big table. Okay, there is no multiple tables and there is no relationship between these particular tables. So in that particular terminology, I call that as the unnormalized data. So what are the common problems with respect to unnormalized tables? Like, so it contains multiple values. One single column contains multiple values. Okay, so here is a simple example of having this particular multi-valued data. Okay, multi comma separated values. Okay, so nothing but one column has the multiple values. Okay, so same data is repeating many times, nothing but the duplicates. Okay, so difficult to update or do the CRUD operations. Okay, data inconsistency, difficult to manage. All these related issues when it comes to the unnormalized data. So obviously when there is unstructured data, okay, so you'll have this all this problem. Okay, when there is a proper structure only. Okay, when there is particular normalization process. Okay, so when there is a normalization is a process of organizing the data in the database to reduce the redundancy and to improve the data integrity. Okay, so with respect to this particular normalization, you'll have to we'll develop multiple tables. We'll split the large table into small tables. Okay, we'll establish a relationship between the tables using this particular normalization. Okay, so that it will remove the duplicates. It will have a meaningful relationship between the tables. Okay, it is easy for CRUD operations. Okay, easy for the maintenance. Okay, so if you can see that why normalization is important, it removes the duplicates. Okay, improve the data consistency, makes the data easier to maintain, avoids insert deleted problems. Okay, so this is the basic idea for you to understand the basic normalization and the unnormalized data, and then why we go through the normalization. So now we go through the normalization in detail. What are the different normal forms we have in the normalization, and how do we work with these normal forms? Okay, so before jumping into the normalization, just I wanted to give this particular student course enrollment data. So and also like with respect to the online shopping orders. Okay, so if you can see this particular thing, this is the large table. This is the unnormalized data. Okay, so identify this as the unnormalized data. See here, I have this particular students entity. Okay, and have the courses and the instructors and the phone numbers, all the entities one in one particular table. Okay, so if I see that particular student ID, student name, courses, instructor phone number, all these are in a one particular table. Okay, and this particular thing, like with respect to this particular multi-value attributes, nothing but the comma separated values are in one particular column. Okay, so similarly, if you can go to the online shopping orders, like in terms of this particular thing, see, I'm storing the order details, customer details, products details in one particular table. Okay, so if I can see order ID and the customer name, okay, and the products, like if I see this particular customer name with a particular order ID 101, he has ordered multiple products, and I'm just storing that data into the comma separated value in one particular column. Okay, which is not the right practices. Okay, see, this is the unnormalized data. So we are talking about the unnormalized data. So you need to understand the basic of this particular thing. Like, see, if the single column is storing the multiple values with the comma separated values. Okay, so this is the issues with respect to the unnormalized data. So when it goes to the unnormalized data, so the same data is going to repeat many times, nothing but the duplicates, and difficult to do the CRUD operations, data inconsistency, difficult to manage the large databases. So how do we go through this particular, deal with this particular situation? So we do not store that huge amount of data in one particular single table. So we'll split that particular tables and we'll give the meaningful information. Okay, so now we go through the normalization process. So each normalization process will teach you something, and like we will learn that particular normalization forms, and we'll have this particular large table to be split into multiple tables and give the meaningful relationship. Okay, so let's get into the normalization. So here is the summary of the normalization form. Okay, so do not worry of this each of these particular rules what is there here, but just get an idea. So once you get connect to the tab, and you'll get to understand much in detail. Okay, so if you can see unnormalized data, unnormalized data do not have any rules. Okay, everything is messy. Okay, and data is one in one particular table. So first normalization form states that in the atomic values, no repeated groups. Okay. The second normalization form will talk about the partial dependency. The third normalization form will talk about the transient dependency. Okay. Transitive dependency. Okay. So let's get started to understand the first normalization form, and later we'll jump into the second normalization and the third normalization. Okay. See here, this particular step, like in the unnormalized table, like see here in this particular table, here is the unnormalized table. See here, I have the student ID, student name, courses, okay, instructor, and the phone number. So in this particular thing, if you can observe this particular column, it has the multi-valued attributes, okay, nothing but the comma separated values. So multi-valued attributes cannot be stored in a one particular column. That's what the first normalization form says. Okay, and it can be split, and it should be split into multiple rows. See here I have this particular one. Ravi has 3 courses enrolled. Okay, and 2, Anil has one particular course, and Meena into 2 different courses. So what I did is, like, instead of having this particular 3 multi-valued attributes in a one particular column, I divided this into 3 rows. Okay, see for I got, for Ravi I got 3 rows. Okay, for Anil I got 1 row, and for Meena I got 2 rows. Like in terms of this particular, based on this particular courses. Okay, so let me connect my tab and explain you that in detail. Okay, let me connect to my tab. Yeah, it got connected. So let's understand normalization. I hope you're able to see normalization. Okay, so the first normalization. So what is the first rule of the first normalization rule? Okay, so a single column should not have multiple attributes or comma separated values. Okay, a single column cannot contain multiple attributes, or you can say comma separated values. Okay, so if I can see this particular unnormalized data, so here you have this particular comma separated values. This is not allowed in the first normalization form. So what I did is, like, I divided this particular single row into comma separated value into three rows. Okay, similarly here 2 rows. Okay, so if I wanted to write this data over here, I just wanted to write this data over here in the after the result set of the first normalization form. So what will be the result set after applying first normalization? Okay, so I'm going to write the particular table data here. Okay, so here is the result set that you get once you apply the first normalization form. I get the student ID, student name, okay, course, I get the instructor, I got the instructor phone number. Okay, I'm just drawing the table. One Ravi. Okay, if you want me to show it here, I can show you on the tab as well. Okay, one Ravi course as SQL. Okay, one Ravi again. Okay, he has also the C sharp Angular, right? So C sharp and Angular. C sharp. Okay, one Ravi Angular. Okay, now that we go to Anil. To Anil. Anil is taking only SQL. Okay, and Meena is taking 2 courses. Okay, SQL and like C sharp. So this is the result set one. This is the result set you got after applying this particular rule of like no comma separated values, right? So keep that in mind. John, 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 okay, John, and here David, right? Here it's like the instructor is David, right? So here instructor is David, so I'm writing that particular David. Okay, 9001, 9001 here, 9001 here, 9001, 9002, 9002. Okay, so I applied this particular first normalization rule, and I made sure each particular column has single value. Okay, so there will be no multi-valued attributes. Each column has a unique value. Okay, so now this particular thing, like once this particular thing, the I'm happy with respect to this particular table has been like no comma separated values. Okay, so now we need to understand the problem here, like in terms of the second normalization form. Okay, so let's understand the second normalization form. So if you understand this particular table, like in terms of this particular result set of this particular table, if you can see the use, you have this particular duplicate values here. So this Ravi is being repeated, Meena is being repeated, John is being repeated. Okay, phone numbers are being repeated. Okay, so all this have this particular duplicate data. Okay, second normalization form. Okay, so identify this particular duplicates. Okay, so also like it has the partial dependency. So what do you mean by partial dependency? So partial dependency is like first you identify this particular table, partial dependency. So I have two problems over here. Okay. So one is the duplicate values and the second thing is the partial dependency. I know that we doesn't discuss on the partial dependency here. So this particular table has the partial dependency that I will let you know here. Yeah. Okay. So let's understand partial dependency. So nothing but the second normalization form tells you that there should be no partial dependency. Okay, so first we need to understand this particular table and why it is having the partial dependency, and how do we remove the partial dependency using this second normalization form. Okay, so if you can see like in this particular result set after applying this particular first normalization table, if you understand this particular table, like you can you identify which is the primary key in this particular table. Okay, so can you say the student ID is the primary key? No. So student ID alone cannot be the primary key since it already has the duplicate values also. Okay, it can't be the primary key. Can it have the combination of student ID plus course? Yes. See here, student ID and the course. Like if you can see the student ID and course, one and SQL. So this is the primary key. One and C sharp. Okay, it's a primary key. Nothing but is a composite primary key. Okay, I hope you understand. Like in terms of this particular thing, a student ID can alone cannot be the primary key, and it also has the prime duplicate values. I will take this particular combination of student ID and the course. Okay, student ID is one and the course is SQL one and C sharp one and Angular two and SQL three and SQL three and C sharp. So is there any duplicate like in any duplicates? No. Each of this particular primary key is represented with a unique value, which is nothing but a composite primary key. So with respect to this particular student ID and course, can I find the instructor? Why not? Okay, I can find the instructor. With respect to this particular student ID and this particular course, can I find the phone number? Instructor phone number? Yes, I can find. So this is the basic identification of having the partial dependency. So like when there is a partial dependency, all the values from the particular, all other column values should be derived from the composite primary key. What does it mean? Like see, so if it is, let's understand partial dependency. So still we need to understand the partial dependency in much in detail. See, let me give an example here. Okay. See, A plus B is the composite primary key. Let's understand if A plus B is the composite primary key and it determines C. Okay. So A should not alone determine C. Okay, so this is correct and this is wrong. So the part of the primary key should not define the other values. Okay, so it is, you see, student ID plus courses I can identify. Okay, course I can identify the instructor. Student ID plus course I can identify the phone number, and these both are correct because it is totally dependent on the composite primary key. But here the problem is, like in this particular table, if you can see this particular table, the student ID can also determine the student name, which is wrong. This is partial dependency. See here, here this is nothing but your partial dependency here. So it is one particular single value which is part of your primary key. Okay, part of your primary key. It is determining your student name. So this is nothing but your partial dependency. Okay. So what I will do is, like, I'm going to split this particular this table into two different tables. Okay. So what I will do is, like, I will, whichever this particular part single student ID and the student name, which is nothing but the partial part of this particular composite primary key, I will take that into one particular table, and the composite primary keys into another table. Okay. So I will split into two different tables. Okay. Table 1 and table 2. So table 1 have student, the student table. Okay, I will write it. Okay, student table and student course. Okay, student table will have the student ID and the student name. Two columns here. No. Oh, okay, two columns. Student ID and student name. Student ID is 1, Ravi. Okay, 2, Anil. 3, Meena. Okay, I think this space is not enough. Let me take on to another table, another page. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, I'm just taking another page over here. The space is not enough for me. Or write it out over here. See that particular table, like whichever that particular table we have this particular last table, right? So this particular table, I divided this particular into two two tables. So if I see this particular table here, table result after first normalization form. Okay. So what is the first normalization after, what is the table result after applying the first normalization form? Student ID, student name, okay, course, instructor, and phone number. Okay, let me get back to this particular tab again. Okay, so here is the result set after applying your first normalization from, right? So this particular thing has the partial dependency, and you know what is partial dependency now. So if it is a plus b, if it is a plus b is a composite primary key, so it is all the particular, based on this particular, all the other columns, like with respect to student name, instructor, phone number, has to be derived from this particular composite primary key, which is nothing but the student ID and the course. Okay, student ID and this particular course. So but I can find the student name, but I can find the student name with respect to the student ID, which is nothing but, it's a wrong, it is not having this, which is the partial dependency. Okay, so if I have this particular student ID plus course, I can identify the instructor. Okay, I can also identify the phone number. Okay, which is the right one. But here the student ID, which is the part of the primary key, which is the part of the primary key here, this is the primary key. Okay, which is the part of the primary key, is now determining the student name. So which is nothing but, it is the issue over here. So what I will do is, like, I will split this particular table into two different tables. Okay, so table 1 and table 2. Table 1 will have the student ID and the student name. Okay, student table will have the student table here. Table 2 will have the student courses. Okay, student courses. Okay, student, what will the table 1 will have the student ID and the student name. Okay, okay, bear with me for a while. So what I will get, 1 Ravi, 2 Anil, 3 Meena. Okay, now if you can see, there is no duplicates here. Okay, 1 Ravi, 2 Anil, and 3 Meena have this particular table has been well defined, right? So what I did is, like, I defined this, but after applying this particular first normalization normalization, I split this particular table into two different tables. Okay, the other table is like this student course. See here, I will identify this particular student course, something like this. Okay, I have this particular student ID. Okay, course, instructor, and phone number. Okay, student ID, I have to go to the data here. Student ID 1, course SQL, instructor John, phone number 9001. Okay, so 1 again C sharp, John, and 9001. Okay, again, like with respect to the 1, Angular, John, 9001. Now with respect to the Anil, like he is having the SQL, right? He is taking SQL. Don't confuse with respect to the data. Okay, Anil is taking SQL. So all you need to understand, like, I'm just, whatever the split data, I'm just arranging the data into the table data again. Okay, so here John 9001. Similarly for Meena, like we take SQL C sharp. Okay, here David 9002. Okay, if you want me to show this particular in the PPT itself, okay, I can show you. So here, after applying the second normal form, like, I split this particular data into two different tables. Okay, here the first table have this particular primary key, primary key, student ID, and it is determining the student name. Okay, and here in the second table, like in the student ID and the course, based on the student ID and the course, I can find the instructor and the instructor phone number. So I hope you understand this particular data, like in terms of identifying the second normalization form. So, but still, this second normalization result, like, we do not have any problem with respect to the table 1, but table 2, if you can see, you still have the duplicates here. Okay, you still have the duplicates here. Okay, you have the instructor phone number, and like this particular thing, like, you have the transient dependency. So the third normalization form says that it should not have the transient dependency. Okay, let's understand what is transient dependency. Okay, so let me connect them back to my tab again. I hope you understand the second normalization form. If you are unclear, just go through this once again. See here, the first normalization form we applied. Okay, the primary key is the student ID and the course. Okay, we can identify the student, instructor, and the phone number, but it is also determining just the student name directly with respect to student ID, which is the part of the primary key. So what I did is, I split this particular table data into multiple two tables. Okay, so this is the independent part of the primary key, nothing but the single primary key, and this is the composite primary key into two different tables. Okay, again, this has this particular data, like, if you can see this particular data, it has a transient dependency. So let's understand the normal form. Okay, no transient dependency. So if before understanding this particular third normal form, let understand the transient dependency. Okay, so let understand this one. A determines B and B determines C. Okay, so here, if you can see, C is not dependent on A alone. C is not dependent on A alone, but it depends on it is dependent through another column A. Okay, so this should be not be the case. See, if A determines B and B determines C, C is not dependent on A alone. Okay, so first point you have to keep in mind, C is not dependent on A alone. It is depend through another column A. Okay, so this is nothing but the transient dependency. So here we should not have the transient dependency to be implemented in our tables. So if you can see here in this particular table, it has the student ID, courses, and the instructor and the phone number, right? So based on this particular student ID plus course composite primary key, I'm able to find the instructor, right? And based on the instructor name, I'm finding the phone number, which is wrong. Okay, so it is nothing but like the no transient dependency in the third normally form. So keep that in mind. So if you can see here, how do I, this is the composite primary key, right? Student ID in table 2, this is the composite primary key. SQL 1 and SQL is the composite primary key. 1 and C# is the primary key. 1 and Angular, 2 SQL, 3 SQL, 3 C# is this is the composite primary key in your student course table. Okay, so based, if I wanted to find this particular phone number of a particular instructor, what I will do first, I will go and find based on the student ID and the course, I will find the instructor. So first for SQL, like see, for 1 and SQL, John is the instructor, and based on the John, I will find the phone number. So similarly, like with respect to the, see here for Anil, like in terms of 2 SQL, John is the instructor and he will go and find this particular phone number 9002. Similarly for 3 and SQL, David is the instructor and David phone number is 9002. Okay, if you want me to show the PPT also, I can show you. So this is the first normalization, this is second normalization form. Okay, see here, if I wanted to find the phone number over here, so first I need to, based on the student ID and the course, I need to find the instructor, and from the instructor I need to find the phone number. Okay, so which is nothing but the transient dependency here, which is what the problem is. So what I will do is, like, again I will split this particular table, okay, the second table into another 2 tables, which is nothing but the student ID and the course and the instructor in one particular table, and the instructor and the phone number in the another table. Okay, so that's the third normalization form that we need to apply. So but before understand the transient dependency here, see here in this particular student's course, we do not have any problem with respect to the first table, right? Okay, so the student ID and the student name, this is perfectly correct. So the student courses tables over here, I have this particular student ID, I have the course as the composite primary key. So based on this particular composite primary key, I go and find the instructor, and from the instructor I am going and finding the instructor phone number, which is nothing but the transient dependency. So in transient dependency, so the third normalization form states that there should be no transient dependency. So I, in the third normalization form, what I will do is like this, but the table 1 will remain the same thing, but the table 2, I will have this particular last table to be split into 2 different tables. Okay, which is nothing but student ID, student course, and the instructor in one particular table, and the instructor and the instructor phone number into another table. So nothing but, instead of like A determines B, B determines C, I'm just separating the A and B and C into another 2 different tables. Okay, student and the course composite primary keys, which determines the instructor, I will take to on one table, and the instructor, based on the instructor and finding the phone number, I will take to another table. Okay, I hope you understand. If you want me to repeat, I can repeat it again. See here, based on the student ID and the course, I find the instructor, and the instructor, based on the instructor, I find the instructor phone number. Okay, which is nothing but the transient dependency. That transient dependency should not be there in the third normalization form. Okay, so what I will do is, like, I will divide this particular table into 2 different tables. How? So based on the student ID and the student course, I can find the instructor, right? So I will based on this particular three columns, I will have this particular one table. Okay. So based on the instructor, I can find the phone number, right? I will have the second table which has the instructor and the instructor phone number. Okay. If you can open this particular slide, I can show you this particular thing. The student courses, what I did is this large table. Okay. So this here in this particular below table, I divided this into two different parts, like see student ID, course, and instructor. Okay. So again, the table like instructor and the instructor phone number. Okay. So if you can see the final result after applying the third normalization form, see this particular student table remains the same thing. Okay. So I have this particular student ID and the student course. Based on this particular composite primary key, I can go and find the instructor and the instructor name. Based on this particular instructor name, I can find the phone number. Okay. So this is the third normalization form. I hope you understand with respect to this particular complete thing. Okay. So if you can understand the unnormalized data, okay, let me recap everything. So the first normalization form says that there should be no single column should not have the multi-valued attributes or comma separated values. Okay. So it should have a single unit of value. Okay. So for that, what I will do is like all these particular comma separated values, I will split into three rows. Okay. I had this particular three rows for Ravi. Okay, since he's taking three courses. Okay, Anil one. Okay, so Anil one, and like Meena two courses, SQL and C Sharp. I divided this particular thing into multiple rows. Okay, so multi-valued attributes to multiple rows. Okay, so what's the rule of the first normalization form. So if we can see, the first normalization states that atomic values and no repeating groups. Okay, and like second normalization form, the second normalization form says that there should be no partial dependency. So you already understand what is partial dependency, right? Like with respect to our writings, if we can go to connect to the tab. Okay, give me a minute over here. I'm just extracting the previous writing. Okay, I wanted to recap so that you will this idea. Okay. So after applying the result set of first normalization form, so it has the partial dependency. See, student ID, if I identify the primary key over here, student ID can't be the primary key. Okay. It should be the student ID and the course, right? So which is nothing but the composite primary key. So all the values should be derived from the composite primary key itself. The part of your primary key, student ID, should not determine other column. But here it is what's the problem is like the student ID is like determine the student name. So based on the student ID, I can find the name also, right? So here if you can see, so if A plus B determines C, A alone should not determine C. Okay, so if you can see like the student ID plus course, it can find the instructor and the phone number. But the problem it is also it can also identify the student ID, and this based on student ID, it can identify the student name, which is nothing but the partial dependency. And how do I deal with this? Like I split this particular table into multiple tables, right? So which we have done in our second writings. Okay, let me open that one. It's taking some time. Okay, so what I did is I split this particular two tables in last table again into multiple table. Okay, so what I did is like I have student ID and the student name, which is nothing but the single primary key in one particular table, the composite primary key into another table. Okay, so this is nothing but your result set. Again, like what is this is the issue which has a transient dependency. Okay, transient dependency says that if A determines B and B determines C, C is not dependent on A alone, it is dependence through A, which is nothing but a transient dependency. So here, if you can see student ID and the course, it is finding the instructor, and the instructor based on the instructor, it is finding their phone number, which is nothing but the transient dependency, which is not allowed in your third normalization form. So that's why we applied the third normalization form. Okay. And if here is the result after applying the third normalization form. Okay, so we divided this data like with respect to student ID, course in an instructor one particular table, and the instructor phone number in another table. Okay, I hope you understand with respect to the complete normalization. What is normalization? What is first normalization, second normalization, and third normalization? So first normalization is nothing but single column value, and the second normalization is but no partial dependency, and the third normalization nothing but no transient dependency. Okay, so next part 2 will try to understand with respect to the BCNF and the fourth normalization. Okay, so let's catch up in the next session. Thank you. Thanks for watching.